Just recently on the USAirsoft channel, a new video has come out that has been very enlightening and giving a lot of insight into how the back end of YouTube works. And to some people, it seems extremely dire and even like the demise of Airsoft content as a whole is imminent. But today I am here to give my own thoughts on what is going on and hopefully bring a bit more of a positive outlook moving forward on the current situation. Welcome back to the Wolfsden, and to all of our new viewers, it is, as always, great to have you here today. I greatly appreciate you guys stopping by today's video, and I thank you for your time. Now, in the opening, I mentioned that Scott Hallenbeck of USAirsoft has just recently come out with a new video giving some new details and some very interesting new information on how YouTube works on the back end. Not only that, but also how it affects specifically the firearm and airsoft communities. But I think the bigger picture is this doesn't just affect those two communities, but it also affects a lot of other communities that aren't protected in the same way that, say, gaming or music does. And for that reason, I have decided to make this video as a response video, specifically honing in on 6 key questions and the subsequent answers that followed them that he had in his video. I won't be covering the entire hour and 10 minutes. As you all know, that's not really what I want to do. That's not the type of content I usually make. So I'm going to just be honing in on the ones that I found the most intriguing or fascinating, or the ones that I think can provide the most information to those of you that watch my content. Especially those of you that, as you mentioned in the comments, are aspiring content creators yourselves, or have just recently started your own channels, as I did just about 3 years ago this September. A brief introduction for myself. My name is Wolf, or at least that is my call sign. That's what a lot of people out in the field call me. That is what I go by here on the channel. And I have about a decade of experience in the world of Airsoft. And as I mentioned, I've been doing YouTube for 2 years, going to be 3 years this September of 2025. And on my time on YouTube, as many of you will know if you've been here for a while, you always know that I like to have a more optimistic, a more positive outlook on what is going on, rather than throwing around the drama and the negativity. And today, that is exactly what I'm going to be doing, trying to add a little bit of light to what otherwise seems like a very bleak and disheartening situation. This video is entirely meant to help educate you guys and keep you all in the loop of what's happening behind the scenes at YouTube and with Scott's new findings that, again, might be able to help some of you in the future. It'll definitely help me moving forward, making some changes to the channel, and hopefully being able to follow within YouTube systems a little better to help gain a little more growth, a little more traction, and avoid some of the negative consequences that can come with it. Speaking of Scott, I do quickly as well, before we get into anything, I want to say directly to our main man, thank you, Scott, if you end up watching. I greatly appreciate what you've done. I know you put a lot of time, a lot of effort into this video. I've been kind of following it as you put things out about it. Very eager to see what your findings are, and I can say 100% that your findings are definitely invaluable. And as such, I want to thank you immensely for kind of sticking your neck out on the line for the future of Airsoft content here on YouTube and firearm content as well. As someone who's been watching your stuff for a long time, you've been a big inspiration for me in making some videos. So, truly, from the heart, thank you, Scott. And of course, Scott, if you want to get a hold of me and talk about this a little more, I know I'm a small fry compared to you in the Airsoft space, or someone like Jet, or Novrich, or Dutch, or Alphonse. But absolutely, if for whatever reason you want to talk to me in particular more about this situation, if anything I say, I either get it incorrect, or I phrase it the wrong way, or you find my take on it interesting, I would love to talk to you about it. Or, I mean, hell, we could even make a video at some point together. I hear that you're a fan of unique platforms, I'll say. And I think I have quite a few of those. So, if there's any platform that you'd like to have a little more info on in my collection, definitely let me know. I think I could help a brother out. With that said, though, we're going to go ahead and get right into the meat and potatoes of today's video, and we're going to start with some of the lighter questions. Firstly, go and check out Scott's video if you haven't already. It's far more detailed and has far more questions than what I'm going to cover. Again, I'm just looking at 6 of them that I found to be the most important for you guys in the community, and that I found the most interesting myself for my own channel. So, if you want all the questions and all of the explanations, all the details for them, go check out Scott's video. It will be in the description below and in the pinned comment. So, absolutely go and check that out. Go and help spread the word on all the stuff that he found, and details that he had to share. Getting into question 1, I do have a brief synopsis of the question and then the subsequent answer to help keep myself on track. I'm going to go through, read the question, give the answer in a sort of summarized fashion, and then I will give my response to it after we've kind of gone through and talked about all of the questions and answers at once. So, the very first question that I want to talk about is one of the first that Scott had up on the video, which is, does YouTube know the difference between airsoft and actual firearm content? Now, the answer to this is yes. The people at YouTube do know the difference between real firearms and airsoft. That is not necessarily outside their scope. They do know what the difference is, and that they're two completely different communities, two completely different subsets. Where the quote-unquote issue lies is with the AI behind it. That goes through and manually scans things, kind of looking for keywords, images, things like that, that doesn't necessarily know the difference between a replica M4 and a real M4. As you guys might have noticed, I don't have anything behind me. That is on purpose so that this video doesn't get flagged by that system as firearm content, because I want this to go out to as many people as possible. Also kind of just testing on my own to see if that is actually the case. I personally believe it is, just based on some other videos that I've had. But more often than not, the AI is going to play it safe rather than sorry, and if it looks like it's firearm content or sounds like it's firearm content, it's probably going to get flagged as such, even if it's just airsoft content like gameplay or a weapon review or something like that. So the brief answer to that is yes, they do know the difference, but more often than not, they're going to play it safe rather than sorry, which not necessarily a surprise to me, possibly to you guys out there. Question number 2 kind of falls into the same category, which is, does YouTube intentionally suppress airsoft as a whole, or is it simply a case-by-case basis depending on the channel and the content within it? Now, the answer to this isn't particularly surprising. No, airsoft as a whole is not suppressed, but if creators are doing things that the system deems or labels as potentially dangerous or harmful, it absolutely will suppress said content. Again, not a surprise whatsoever, but I think what people need to be paying a little bit more attention to in relation to this particular answer and question is what is deemed as dangerous or harmful. As many of you out there will know, airsoft on a whole, as a physically demanding sport, can be inherently dangerous like a lot of other physically demanding sports. It's not necessarily uncommon for them to be labeled as potentially dangerous when, accidents can occur. You've all seen some of the nasty injuries that can happen in the airsoft space, and what concerns me is if videos like that are showing injuries and trying to help people learn from them from an educational standpoint, and videos like that are simply trying to take an educational stance on it and help others learn from a mistake that a creator made in a particular moment, could potentially be labeled as harmful or dangerous and negatively impact the channel or the creator themselves. Now, of course, there's a whole other discussion about the actually negative things that would get flagged by the system, such as overshooting, cheating, fights. There's a lot of negativity around airsoft, and that's a whole separate discussion that we'll have towards the end, as some of these other questions kind of revolve around it as well. But we'll discuss that a little bit later. But I think there is a little bit of leeway that needs to be given, especially in airsoft and the firearms content, because if you're labeling it as dangerous or harmful in a space that is inherently that, it seems biased towards certain subsects of content just automatically, which isn't entirely fair, at least not to me. Moving to our third question, which is one that I found very fascinating and potentially one that could help you guys out in the future with your own content, your own channels. And it is, does avoiding certain words in airsoft content to not get labeled as firearm content actually work in videos? And the answer to this is, to a certain degree, yes. Using words such as replica, or as Scott mentions, using the word this new piece, this thing out of my collection, or when I say things like platform or system, could potentially help to avoid your content getting labeled as firearm content because you're not using words like gun, or rifle, or assault weapon, things like that. Now, where this system can go wrong is, as Scott mentioned, and I'm sure some of you are aware, it is easily and actively being abused. not necessarily by airsofters on their own, but some firearm content actively uses the term "this is airsoft and not a real weapon" to subvert this system. And while I understand why they do it, to help get their own monetization and to help benefit themselves, that does negatively impact so many other people, because if you continue to abuse that system, continue to push the limits of what's allowed, what isn't, that could negatively come back to bite you in the butt, so to speak, because if you do that enough and YouTube catches on, they'll just start adding new terms that they're going to associate with firearm content, and then we're all screwed because some select people decided, oh, I'm doing firearm content, but I'm going to tell YouTube as I'm doing it, oh, this is a airsoft gun, this is an airsoft replica, it's not a real gun, even when it is. So, you've got to be careful in doing that if you're doing it nefariously. You know who I'm talking about. I've seen it a couple of times. I'm not going to call anyone out. Scott didn't either. I'm going to be respectful. But I've seen it a few times from people doing it either as a joke or actually doing it to go around the system. And it could negatively impact both communities if it continues to be used in a poor manner. Moving into question 4, this is where we kind of get into the heavy stuff. And some of the stuff that definitely is a little more negative than positive. But just bear with me. Question number 4. Can a manual reviewer do negative harm to a creator simply because they don't like them or their content? And the answer, unfortunately, is absolutely they can. Now, this is where I think YouTube more has a problem than we as creators have a problem, because as Scott mentioned in his videos, manual reviewers from his findings don't have to give an explicit reason or an explicit timestamp of where a violation occurred in your video. They can just flag it, report it for demonetization status, or give it a negative, harmful review, and it can completely tank a video, and in some cases, if the channel is small enough and can't recuperate, completely tank a channel if it's done multiple times in a row. That to me is incredibly, incredibly dangerous, and I think there's a problem within YouTube that needs to be solved, because that can so easily be abused, not just in the airsoft space, but in any space within YouTube that isn't protected, like gaming or music is, as Scott mentioned. Which, by the way, if that's not something you've realized, gaming and music is protected, as well as some other things, whereas others aren't. And because of those protections, they can get away with a lot more than, say, my content can, or, say, someone like Brandon Herrera on the firearm end, or Demolition Matt. There are protections in place for certain content and not others, where if they continue to get these negative manual reviews, they get shadow banned, they get these harmful timestamps that demonetize them. It could absolutely crush some channels. Granted, maybe Demolition Ranch or Brandon Herrera or Garanthem, they're exempt because they have other sponsors outside the channel, or they're just big enough where they can get around it. But for someone, say in my case, if I were to get a negative review from a manual reviewer multiple times in a row, it could absolutely cripple the progress and the growth that we've been seeing on my channel in particular, or other people's channels as well. So to me, that is an incredibly, incredibly dangerous answer, and one that I don't think people are talking about enough. Now, where can this improve, or where could this potentially be resolved? Now, there's a couple of things that I have thoughts on with this particular question and the answer that was given in place of it that I think could potentially help to make it better. Now, obviously, people are always going to hate on certain content. They're always going to have a negative bias or a positive bias depending on the content or the creator behind it. That's hard to whittle out. But the way I think we can possibly improve it is having a bit more balance in YouTube's back end. And what do I mean by that? Getting more people that are like-minded or that have less of a bias towards one thing or another could potentially help. But I think the other thing that would help as well, in the review process, giving reviewers more time to actually look through videos, actually see what's going on. Because as Scott found, as he was told, manual reviewers don't get enough time to watch full-length videos. They just don't. They have a certain amount of time, and that's it. that's all they get to review it. There's no way they can watch all the way through, so they might be screwed from the get-go. But if they're given more time to look at content, actually review it properly, that could potentially help. Now, if for whatever reason that's not viable, because there are so many videos out there that need to be reviewed, the other solution is, rather than giving that video to only one person who could be biased towards it, or just not like the person that's making it and flag it, give it to another reviewer after the fact. If the reviews, for whatever reason, don't seem to match up, if they don't have the same response, one's incredibly positive and one's incredibly negative, maybe that video needs to be looked at again to be considered for monetization status. Because clearly something is going on there. There's a bias either towards, in favor of the creator, or a bias against the creator or the content. Clearly something's not right. So I think that's a checks and balance thing that needs to be implemented into YouTube itself. There's not a lot we are as creators can do if a manual reviewer simply just doesn't like us. There's not a lot we can do, unfortunately. But I think there are things within YouTube that could be done to help fix it. Of course, you guys can let me know what your thoughts are on that one in particular down in the comments. That one's a particularly heavy one and one that I took a lot of interest in myself, seeing that there are very clearly some abuse of powers going on, or potentially could be going on within that system. But we're going to go ahead and move on from that to question number 5, which is also kind of interesting. Alright, moving on to question 5. This is also going to be a bit of a lengthier one in terms of the question and answer, but we're going to go through it, and I'm going to try to keep it brief because we do have one more question that I think is also very, very important to have answered. Alright, question number 5. And this one got a couple of different answers from the different people that Scott interviewed, so I'm going to be including all of their answers summarized into one to help make it easier for you guys. Do you see Airsoft / firearms content getting any better in the future, or is it just straight up doomed? As I mentioned, a couple of answers came from this one, and one was a little more optimistic, and one was definitely a little more pessimistic, very much seeing the end of Airsoft as a whole on the platform of YouTube. So the answer is yes and no. Many of the workers at YouTube are left-leaning and by extension anti-Second Amendment or anti-gun entirely. So anything firearm related, including Airsoft, definitely has an upward battle, not necessarily against YouTube itself, but the people looking at and reviewing our content every single time it gets put into review. As I mentioned with question 4, it can be very easily abused, so it's a bit of an upward battle if someone is just straight up, I don't like guns, I don't like Airsoft, or I don't like this person. It's going to be an upward battle against people like that just don't want to give us a chance. Despite that, there will always be a space for firearm-based content, and the space is only growing more and more every year. So from that stance, Airsoft still does have a chance. Now, this particular instance, this particular view, came from another person besides the initial one that thought that it was just completely screwed and there was no chance for Airsoft content in the future. Now, to get even more basic, this is also coming from kind of the answers that were given, but also my own input, kind of looking at it introspectively. YouTube is a company, right? So their bottom line, as Scott mentioned in a lot of his own talkings, his own discussion in his videos, is that YouTube is about making some sort of profit. If YouTube sees a profitability in the firearms industry being on their platform, if they see it being profitable to have Airsoft content on their platform, to some degree we will continue to be allowed to have that type of content on YouTube. Of course, with suppression, shadow banning, manual reviews, that kind of content could be snuffed out entirely, but I don't see Airsoft and firearm content as a whole being completely just outright banned on YouTube, and I don't think Scott does either, nor does any of the people that he was interviewing. It's more of a stance of, does the content as a whole have a future in being able to be monetized, being able to support the creators that want to make it? That's a whole other discussion. To keep it positive, I do think that Airsoft has a chance. I think that there's a place to be successful on YouTube with airsoft content, with firearm content. We've seen it many times with USAirsoft in particular. We've seen it with Airsoft Alphons. We've seen it with Navrich, who has his own company now. Dutch the Hooligan was wildly successful just on the airsoft side. If we look over to the firearm side, there are even more instances. There's Garanthem, there's Brandon Herrera, there's Demolition Matt, there's Kentucky Ballistics. There are so many other people on that side as well that it's almost impossible to snuff out. It just comes down to the will and the urge to continue pushing through and to make it happen, which I'll get into that here in just a little bit. But there is a bit of determination, a bit of grit that has to come from us as the creators. But again, I'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end. Let's move on to question 6, which I think is going to be very important for not just myself, but many of you out there that have said that you want to look at starting a channel, whether it be airsoft, firearm related, or you have already done so, and you're looking for sort of a light at the end of the tunnel. Question 6. Why does it seem that when smaller channels start picking up, they suddenly fall off for seemingly no reason? Now, the answer to this, there are a few of them. It's not necessarily one thing or another, which I kind of thought as well. It could obviously be a natural ebb and flow of the YouTube algorithm, with people coming into a channel, finding it all of a sudden, and one video goes absolutely viral, and then the next one doesn't. So you start to see a decline, and eventually that content creator just never picks back up after that one viral clip. Sometimes that's just how it goes. And with shorts content, it happens a lot. I've had it happen multiple times with my own shorts, and as some of you know, I've started to step back from that, and it's definitely helped with the growth of my long-form content in doing less shorts. There's a whole other discussion with there, but that could just be the natural ebb and flow of views and the algorithm kind of picking things up certain ways and sometimes not. It could just be completely natural. That tends to happen, and I've seen it a lot with my own content and other people's content, so not a surprise there. The other options are, of course, it could be due to the sudden growth in that channel, and with that growth, more risk of people reporting it or flagging it to a manual review, and them getting a very, very harsh review from someone over at YouTube, and that causes their channel or their video to tank. That's entirely plausible. It's hard to tell sometimes with a newer channel, but it's entirely plausible. So again, from that aspect, we're kind of seeing that bit of an overstep in YouTube's abuse of power. Not necessarily from YouTube's stance, but from the stance of the reviewers that look at our content and that just may not like it, the person that's making it, whatever it may be. So that is the last of my questions. Now it's time to kind of talk a little bit more in depth of my own thoughts on the entire situation that I've just described. So after going through all the questions, all the answers, watching Scott's video multiple times over, I think at this point I've watched it maybe 3 or 4 times, maybe 5. But with that said, it's given me a lot to think about, and I'm sure it's given a lot of you guys stuff to think about, not just from the content perspective, but from the YouTube perspective as well. There are definitely some things that I think YouTube itself needs to change. As I mentioned, there's a little bit of an abuse of power that could potentially be going on, not just for airsoft and firearms content, but in other places as well. Anything that's not protected under YouTube's guidelines is potentially a threat. And I think that's the bigger thing at hand here that people aren't necessarily picking up on. It's like, oh, you're just, you're trying to protect guns and you're trying to protect airsoft and all that. It's not just that. This can potentially be used against other communities and other types of content as well. And that to me is incredibly dangerous for as large of a platform as YouTube is. And I think, as I mentioned, there's a couple of places where YouTube could potentially improve the system such that communities don't just get absolutely flatlined because of reviews, because of the way the algorithm works, and gives them an actual chance to be successful. Rather than setting them up for failure by not giving them proper protections and proper ways to combat things, could potentially help YouTube expand and grow even beyond what it is already. This could potentially be even a better move for YouTube as a whole rather than what they've been doing. I don't know that. This is all kind of speculative, so take it with whatever grain of salt you would like to. But as I mentioned, potentially setting in a new system of how manual reviews are done, giving the opportunity for a creator to have more than just a single review on a video could be the night and day difference between having success and having an absolute failure of a video. As I said, all it takes is one bad review and a video can absolutely tank compared to the rest of them. So if someone gives a negative review, having that second view, that second opinion, assuming they're not going to immediately be negative towards it as well, of course, there's loopholes and things, but being given that opportunity and being given that chance could be a world of difference. Of course, I don't have a lot of sway on YouTube side. I'm just to them, I'm probably a small speck in the larger cog, in the larger machine. But at the same time, seeing the problems and adapting and overcoming them is very vital. So YouTube side, I think, obviously, as I mentioned, they have some things that need to improve. The real question is, what can we in the Airsoft and firearms community do to improve our own situation? Rather than relying on YouTube to make these changes, rather than expecting YouTube to do this and to do that, what is it that we can do to help improve our own situation and improve our own likelihoods of success? That's a bit harder of a question, because everyone's situation is different, everyone's content is a little bit different, you have a different take, you have a different way of doing things. But I think the main things that we can do for our own communities, specifically Airsoft, because that's my area of expertise, this could apply to the firearms industry as well, if you want to look at it that way, or any other type of content, I think is trying to put our content in as best of a light as possible, giving it as much of a chance to be perceived by the general public, by the general eye, as a good thing. For the Airsoft community in particular, this is going to sound very much like I'm beating a dead horse, like a broken record, but putting more positivity into the community of Airsoft is very important. Scott mentioned it in his own video, but not doing so much negative content in the space and making that the first thing that they see is really important. That first impression of getting someone in, seeing a video, and the first thing they see when they type in Airsoft onto their keyboard or onto their phone, and it's a cheater video, or it's a drama video, or a fight, or some negative thing, some negative stereotype or stigma that is going to stick with them every time they see the word Airsoft pop up in their feed, that is not a good look for the Airsoft community whatsoever. You guys know I don't like doing Airsoft cheater videos or drama videos. I've done them a handful of times, I will admit, but normally I do them from an educational standpoint, not trying to create drama or provoke a reaction, but to educate and to better enlighten people on the current situation in my gameplay videos or whatever it may be. That type of content I think needs to start phasing out. I think Airsoft as a whole potentially needs to start evolving to include better content. Not necessarily that gameplay content is a bad thing. You guys know I love sharing gameplay with you guys, sharing my experiences, especially the funny moments, the moments of interacting with you guys in the community. I love doing that. But I think it's time for Airsoft to evolve, push out some of this negative stigma that we've had, and start looking towards something a little different. I don't know necessarily what that is. I don't have all the answers. I myself am still trying to find what that magic bullet, so to speak, is. And I think it's going to take all of us trying to experiment, trying new things, doing things a little differently than we have been, and moving away from that negative stigma that Airsoft has gained to be able to push ourselves out of this rut, so to speak. Now, of course, if you guys have ideas of your own, thoughts of your own, things that you think we could be doing differently in the space to help make content improve, help be successful for content to come, please let me know. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I will absolutely respond. Anybody that comes in with a response or a thought or something that they think could potentially help to improve the situation, I will 100% respond to your comment. It might take me a little bit if we get an influx of comments. Plus, with all the stuff I've been working on, it might take me a little bit, but I promise you, if you leave something like a thought or a comment, I would love to have a discussion with you guys down in the comments. Or if you want to ping me on any of my other platforms and discuss it, I absolutely would love to. As you guys know, I'm very passionate about this sport, about this industry, not just this one, but the firearm one as well. I love all of the content that comes out of it, and I think we have a chance if we just continue pushing. With all that said, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I know it was a little bit more serious, less memes, less funny moments like I usually try to have put into the videos, but I hope it's been enlightening. I hope it's been helpful. Again, let me know your guys' thoughts down in the comments below. Be sure to go and check out USAirsoft's full video. Go give Scott some love. He put a lot of time, a lot of effort into this video, and it's a lot more in-depth than what I've given because he has a lot more answers than I currently have. I'm going off of what he has, and I just wanted to hone in on a couple of them that I found interesting or that I thought would help you guys, as I mentioned before. Of course, if you're new here, if this is your very first video, I promise this is not the normal type of content that I make. This is far more serious than normal. I usually make a lot more jokes and things like that. So if you want to check out some of my other videos, I'll have a link down to one of my personal favorite gameplay videos in the recent months. And that will be in the pinned comment as well as the description, along with Scott's video if you want to go check that out. Of course, the best way to support the channel is by checking out Wolfsden Apparel. Link to that will be in the description as well as the pinned comment. And as always, this has been Wolf, and I hope to see you guys next time I hit the field.